George Floyd was murdered by a Minneapolis police officer, a tragedy that resonated across the globe, a tragedy that was felt by people across the world, but specifically the residents and neighborhoods in our city, and felt most acutely by Black residents in Minneapolis. This legally binding agreement will give the city additional tools and the clarity as we continue doing the hard work about building trust and accountability in our communities. This is an incredibly important agreement. It's a good agreement. And at the same time, I want to be honest with every resident throughout our city. It is not a panacea. There aren't any shortcuts, and success is not guaranteed. We got to work for it. Success will require buy-in. Buy-in from the Minneapolis Police Department and the officers that are charged with protecting and serving every resident and every visitor to our city. Success will require strong community partnerships and collaboration across many neighborhoods. Success will require consistency, clarity, and accountability across elected leadership, and that includes me. I'm committed to making sure that our city, our staff, our leadership team from Commissioner Barnett to Chief O'Hara have the resources that they need in order to succeed. We have heard loud and clear from people across the world. Minneapolis deserves wholesale change. Justice and accountability must be tangible, not just words on a paper, but a reality that is lived in every interaction with every police officer in our Minneapolis Police Department. And the need for police reform, it did not start with George Floyd's murder, and it does not end with the signing of this consent decree. Rebuilding trust must be a daily practice. And over the last several years, we've positioned ourselves to do this work, to see through that wholesale change, and to drive forward with the necessary reforms that people rightfully demand. Work has been happening every day, and because of this, I know we are well positioned. We are well positioned to move forward with this consent decree. We've established an Office of Community Safety to provide a comprehensive approach to safety in our city. We've expanded our mental health response to 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. We've revised policies involving the use of force. We've doubled down on violence prevention. We've done the necessary work to pilot innovative programs that go well beyond but also include policing. And we've invested millions of dollars in reform, into staffing, into the tools and programs that can and will ultimately last in a permanent fashion. And we've also built out an implementation team, which has already begun enacting change spelled out under the state settlement agreement. And today, we take another step to build on this work. This consent decree outlines the necessary change that we need to see for essential trust to be built. While the Assistant Attorney General, Kristen Clarke, and our Chief O'Hara will get into many of the details, the most important thing that I wanted to note is that this consent decree provides a clear path forward. It notes the objective standards that we need to hit. Our administration will wake up every morning and we will go to bed every night with the clear goals in mind that we need to hit. The clear goals that aren't going to change with political wins or shifts of administrations. It's signed with a solidified document and one that we are committing to permanently, not just for the period that this consent decree lasts, but for generations to come in the city of Minneapolis. This is the kind of change that we, together, are signing on to. The reforms in this consent decree are not just about changing of policies. They're changing how our residents feel about our city, how they experience interactions with police officers. And this change is underway. The change is afoot. There's so many people that I want to thank. I want to begin by thanking the Department of Justice, specifically the Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke, who we are truly honored to have us with us here today. Together, we saw the importance of getting this work done, of seeing through this wholesale change, and meeting the magnitude of this moment. Thank you. Thank you for your partnership. To members of our own safety team, to Commissioner Todd Barnett, to Chief Brian O'Hara, you and your respective departments have committed to this change, and you've been committed since day one. Thank you. To the entire Minneapolis Police Department, you're going to rise to the occasion. We're going to rise to the occasion together. I trust the members of this department to show up every day, that you will be committed to being the change reflected in this agreement. You have the ability, you have the obligation, and you have the responsibility to set the tone and show the rest of the country, in fact, the rest of the world, what good constitutional policing looks like. We have high expectations for your work, and we'll also help you meet this moment. To those who helped craft this agreement, led by City Attorney Kristen Anderson, you have put in a tremendous amount of work, both you and your team. It's a 167-page document, and your commitment and your dedication to acting both with urgency but also making sure that we got it right will help residents of our city for generations to come. And most importantly, I want to thank the people of Minneapolis. This decree was not created in a vacuum. It came from talking to you. It came from very intentional engagement. We heard loud and clear from each and every one of you that you're demanding change and that you were willing to work with us to get this right. It comes from the voices from all of you, from the countless people that have called for this essential change. We hear you. We're committed to working with you. And you're not just participants in this reform, you will be partners in it. The work does not end here. The work will last for generations to come, but here in Minneapolis, change is afoot. With that, I'm proud to hand it off to the Assistant Attorney General, Kristen Clarke.
Kristen Clarke, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice. I am so pleased to stand here today with Mayor Frey and Minneapolis Police Department Chief O'Hara. Today, the Justice Department and the City of Minneapolis have agreed to a court-enforceable consent decree addressing the United States findings that the City and Police Department engage in a pattern or practice of conduct that violates the Constitution and federal law. The Justice Department's investigation found that the police used excessive force, unlawfully discriminated against Black and Native American people in its enforcement activities, violated the rights of those engaged in protected speech, and together with the city, discriminated against people with behavioral health disabilities when responding to calls for assistance. These are severe problems that require a strong remedy. But today is a new day. The consent decree that we are announcing today is robust and comprehensive in scope. The decree focuses on 4 core goals: promoting constitutional policing, strengthening trust and public confidence in law enforcement, promoting public safety, and ensuring freedom from discrimination and bias. The decree sets forth remedies to address the problems identified in our findings. These remedies include limiting use of force, closely regulating or eliminating some types of force altogether, and adopting a system to thoroughly and fairly investigate uses of force. Ensuring officers intervene to prevent unlawful uses of force and that they seek prompt medical care as needed. Avoiding unnecessary stops by focusing traffic enforcement on improving public safety. Regularly assessing whether the police department's enforcement programs are causing racial disparities and taking action to avoid those disparities. protecting journalists from retaliation by law enforcement, and safeguarding their right of access during demonstrations so that they can report to the fullest extent possible. Protecting the right to engage in demonstration and protest by focusing on de-escalation, limiting use of militarized tactics, and restricting use of force, including by barring the use of CN gas, a dangerous type of tear gas. Supporting the city's non-police behavioral health response program with the goal of not using police officers to respond to people with behavioral health needs where there's no need for a law enforcement response, and avoiding the use of handcuffs on children under the age of 14. I want to turn now to our next steps. Today, we are filing a complaint in federal court that outlines the violations of law identified during our investigation. We're also asking the court to issue an order approving the terms of the consent decree. We're also seeking the designation of an independent monitor and have asked the court to appoint effective law enforcement for all, which is evaluating the city's compliance with a settlement with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights to monitor implementation with the federal consent decree. This appointment will promote efficiency in monitoring and help ensure that the city and police department are able to build on the work that they've already been doing to comply with the state settlement. We believe that these reforms can be instituted swiftly. The Justice Department will move to terminate provisions of the decree as full and effective compliance is achieved. We are confident that Minneapolis will comply with the consent decree's requirements, as the city has already been taking a number of important steps along the path to reform. For example, MPD policy now prohibits neck restraints, and officers cannot use crowd control weapons without approval of the MPD chief. Following the 2022 death of Amir Locke during a no-knock warrant execution, MPD banned their use. And the city has already launched a promising behavioral health response program so that trained mental health professionals will respond to calls for service that do not warrant a police response. Building on all of this momentum, we have every confidence that the Minneapolis Police Department will emerge from this process a more trusted and an even more effective law enforcement agency. I want to be clear, policing is a dangerous and difficult job. We know that most officers serve with honor and with great personal sacrifice. With this decree, we have the opportunity to see that they get the tools and support they need to do their job safely and effectively. For example, the consent decree requires the city to provide confidential mental health wellness services for all officers. The people of Minneapolis have made clear that they deserve constitutional and lawful policing. We urge the public to remain engaged in this process. Public input on policies, comments at hearings, and involvement on advisory groups will be key in the road ahead and essential to ensuring that these reforms are enduring. The consent decree is by no means a ceiling on reform. It's just a starting point. Community members can and should continue to advocate for reforms beyond the scope of this decree and push for change deemed necessary for a safe and equitable Minneapolis. We all remember the tragic events of May 25th, 2020, when Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd while 3 other officers stood by and failed to intervene, to act, or to save him. I took an oath to office as the Assistant Attorney General of the Civil Rights Division just 1 year after George Floyd's death. George Floyd's death was not just a tragedy, it was a galvanizing force for the city and for the nation. All eyes remain on Minneapolis. And with this consent decree, we now have a roadmap for reform that will help this community heal while strengthening trust between law enforcement and the people they serve. There can be no question that this decree marks a new day and represents a critical step forward in our work to ensure constitutional policing. A brief word on consent decrees. Consent decrees in the policing context are important vehicles for protecting the civil and constitutional rights of people living in communities where they have identified pattern and practice violations. They help us avoid contested litigation and put communities immediately on the path to reform and transformation. When entered by the court, the Minneapolis consent decree will be the 16th policing pattern or practice consent decree and settlement agreement that the Justice Department is currently enforcing. 30 years of experience makes clear that consent decrees continue to be successful in achieving reform. Cities that have worked collaboratively with the Justice Department have made important, tangible progress toward better, safer, and lawful policing. For example, the Seattle Police Department has reduced the use of force in crisis incidents to less than 2% of such incidents, and the majority of force used, 65%, is now low level. In Portland, the police department has significantly reduced the use of tasers, and when officers do use them, they comply with police and national standards. In Newark, officers now conduct stops in compliance with constitutional standards, and the city developed promising and successful public safety systems that include the community, like a community street team of non-police responders. These efforts have been successful at reducing the burden on law enforcement and reduced crime, which is down 40% since we entered the decree. In Albuquerque, nearly 5% of the call volume to the Albuquerque Police Department is now diverted to the Albuquerque Community Safety, which sends teams of civilian responders to assist people with behavioral health needs. And in New Orleans, the police department went from a high of 22 critical incidents in 2012 to a low of 5 critical incidents in 2023. I want to close by again thanking Mayor Frey and Chief O'Hara for their tremendous leadership. I also want to recognize my team, the dedicated career attorneys and professionals in the Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota, who worked jointly on this important matter. They worked closely with police professionals and experts at every stage of this process. They are and always have been the true backbone of the Justice Department. You'll now hear from Chief O'Hara.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. Today marks an important and pivotal moment in the history of the Minneapolis Police Department and for the people that we serve. We are here to reaffirm our commitment to accountability, transparency, and a future where reducing crime and earning community trust go hand in hand. I want to make it clear, this is not the beginning of our efforts to reform. Much of the hard work to improve this department has already been underway as part of our settlement agreement with the state of Minnesota. This agreement builds upon those efforts and sets a framework to guide continuing transformation. I have experience leading a department through a federal consent decree. In Newark, we proved how reform can lead to meaningful change. That happens through strong leadership, community collaboration, and a true commitment, not just to our community, but to the men and women of our police department as well. Since becoming chief 2 years ago, my mission has been clear: reduce serious crime while earning community trust, and rebuild this police department. Since 2020, a department that typically had 900 officers has lost more than 500. The consent decree presents an additional challenge, but it is also an opportunity. We are not going to just comply with its terms, but we will exceed expectations and we will make change real for people on the street. Saving lives and keeping people safe is our core mission, but it's not something that we can achieve alone. It requires collaboration with our partners and with our community. Together, we will make Minneapolis a place where everyone feels safer and they know that Minneapolis cops will have their back. We are committed to engagement with our community through this process and to holding ourselves accountable. That's the point of these consent decrees, to create an organization that is capable of self-correcting. The consent decree will serve to help build on the progress already underway. In accordance with our state settlement agreement, we have been revising our policies to provide clear, consistent guidance to our officers. And we have been investing in additional training so that our officers can have the tools, skills, and knowledge that they need to succeed. This includes seeking community feedback in our policy and training development so that the community can have a voice in this process. Dozens of new policies and trainings are in the process of being implemented and will soon be implemented this year. But with today's announcement, Minneapolis becomes unique. We'll be the first police department to enter into an agreement while also having one in a state court. While this is an added challenge, Minneapolis is also the first to have a head start. We've already created an implementation unit to implement these requirements. We've already held dozens of town meetings around our city and with specific communities to get community input. We've implemented compliance checks to take action quickly and provide corrective behavior, and implemented a force investigations team specifically to review use of force. This consent decree supports that work and enhances all of that work that's already underway. Like the state settlement agreement, this agreement is more than just a checklist of tasks and projects to accomplish. It is a commitment to the sworn and professional staff of the Minneapolis Police Department that leadership will support you. Modern policing is demanding, and our officers deserve our support. We are committed to improving staffing, updating equipment and facilities, and expanding wellness programs to ensure every member of the MPD has what they need to meet the challenges of this profession. Too many times, systems have failed the good men and women of this profession. Thank you to everyone in community that has been working with us. I want our residents to know that we will continue to be responsive to their concerns. And in every enforcement action we do, we will be as precise as possible. We will aim to reduce crime while earning your trust. That is the key to effective crime reduction. You cannot reduce crime and maintain those reductions over time unless you are also doing it in a way that earns trust with the community. Our police department will continue to be the department that more and more people in our community and around this country can be proud of. While the independent monitor will help evaluate our progress, the responsibility to make this a success and to achieve not only compliance, but to achieve that change on the street rests with us, the men and women of the Minneapolis Police Department. And I am confident that the resilient and incredibly dedicated professionals that staff it are up to this challenge. To those sworn members and the professional staff of the Minneapolis Police Department, thank you for your dedication to duty. Thank you for your resilience in the face of unprecedented challenges over the last few years. I have come to see, I have learned your passion, your commitment, and together, without question, this police department has turned a corner. Together, we will continue to rebuild the MPD, make our city safer, and become the best police department in America.
We will now take questions. Question, when called upon, please repeat your full name and media outlet. We're going to start with Dina.
Just wondering what confidence you have. Is there any concern about whether this can go through before Trump takes office January 20th, and how that would affect this consent?
This investigation was carried out by the dedicated career professionals of the Justice Department. The Justice Department has always been focused on ensuring public safety and protecting civil and constitutional rights. It's what brought us here, and we're proud to have submitted to the federal court today a consent decree that bears the signatures of both the city and the federal government.
All right, Ernesto?
Thank you. Ernesto Londoño with the New York Times. Just following up on that, is there anything holding the incoming Trump administration back from just saying they're not interested in pursuing this and opting out of the continued enforcement of this agreement? And separately, I'm wondering what took so long? It's my sense that in the Obama years, consent decrees were hammered out more quickly. In the Biden administration, we've seen consent decrees that have been negotiated for several years. Wondering if we could speak to kind of the logistics of how you get these across the finish line and why in recent years they seem to be taking longer to negotiate.
But first, there's no cookie cutter approach to this work. We were exhaustive and comprehensive in our investigation and swiftly got to the table with city officials to negotiate the consent decree submitted to the court today. We moved forward earnestly, recognizing the urgent need and desire for constitutional policing in this community. I'll tell you that sum total of our work is not just about entering consent decrees. It's about breathing life into these documents and achieving real reform and transformation. I provided some examples of the success that we've seen in just the last few years in places like Newark and Seattle and New Orleans. This is time-intensive work that yields tremendous benefit for communities on the back end, but it's important that we get it right.
And the first question, is there anything stopping the Trump administration from opting out of continuing to enforce this?
I can't speak to the future, but the Justice Department has always been focused on ensuring compliance with the Constitution, ensuring compliance with federal law, ensuring public safety. That's what brought us to the table today.
Clint Combs, Minnesota Spokesman Report. I want to touch on that real quick. What took so long between the time Trump won in November to right now to get a consent decree? Because right now it seems like it's being played out in the public that the consent decree was just dealt with today amid Trump's election victory. Do you feel like there was a delay between the time Trump won to the time you guys got the decree in place?
The Justice Department carries out its work without regard to the electoral calendar, free from political interference. We have been hard at work with city officials negotiating a consent decree that works to address the problems that we identified here in this community. It was hard work, but I noted it's a document that the mayor and the police chief and the Justice Department are incredibly proud of.
I'll add, I gave very clear direction to our entire administration to not just get an agreement done with urgency, but to get an agreement done right, to get something that set a standard that everybody understands, a standard that is not going to shift with political winds or changes of administration at the city or federal level. This agreement is rock solid, and our commitment to it, regardless of the circumstances, is also rock solid.
Kyle Stokes from Axios Twin Cities. For whatever reason, why isn't there now a chance that this document might not be locked in as of January 20th, and that if that's the case, then it's possible that it might not be enforced? That's one question. The second, I'm wondering, what are parts of the consent decree that are not currently present in the state MDHR settlement agreement?
Well, I can't predict the future. What I can tell you is that the findings we identified in Minneapolis are severe. These are real issues that impact people's lives. The community wants reform. The city wants reform. The police department wants reform. And the Justice Department stands here today as a full partner in the effort of achieving reform and transformation for this community.
And as to the differences between the two, is there any discussion of the differences between the MDHR settlement and the Justice Department settlement? Something that's in the consent decree that's not in the MDHR settlement?
There are issues that we deal with in the federal consent decree that go above and beyond the State Division of Human Rights document.
Yeah, there are several items within the federal consent decree that add on. One is First Amendment protections, as specifically as it applies to media and press. A second is in the behavioral crisis response and the work that we all are committed to doing around that facet. A third is around supervision. That's one of the most important pieces that is in this consent decree. It's also very difficult to get done. Ensuring that supervision itself is consistent, and so that officers are reporting up through a chain of command that is consistent, and the direction that is given is clear. Those are three examples. I know there's well more than that.
Matt, go ahead.
Matt Sepik with NPR News. Technical legal question. This would take effect upon the judge's signature.
That's correct. The judge entering an order.
And when do you expect that to happen?
We filed the our complaint and the consent decree today, and we look forward to hearing from the courts very soon.
And if the next Attorney General just decides not interested anymore in consent decrees, and I'm kind of following up on what other people asked, does this continue to be effective legally in the courts regardless of what the next administration wants to do? Is it written in such a way that it will continue on and continue to be enforceable?
While I can't answer the hypothetical, what we know is very real are the significant and severe violations of law and the Constitution that brought us here. We have a duty and an obligation to not turn a blind eye to those issues, and look forward to working with this community to bring about constitutional policing in this community. The people of Minneapolis deserve nothing less than that.
Ryan? Hi, Ryan Taylor, Care 11. Can you explain the process for something being reported by the independent monitor that is not being followed, and what are the consequences for it?
Yet the independent monitor will issue public reports periodically. The community will have a role in this process at every turn. And we know to date that the city has had a good track record of working with this monitoring team. It gives us reason to be very encouraged that reform can be achieved swiftly in the road ahead. Anything you want to add there?
At what point do you think that this consent decree will be removed or expire, and how will you know that it was successful?
It's hard to put a timeline on it, but we have full reason to be very encouraged, given, as you heard from the police chief, they're off to a sprinting start. There are already a number of reforms that have been implemented, and we're confident that with the partnership we have forged here, and that we stand and demonstrate to the public today, that we can get to the finish line in a matter of years.
All right, last question, Liz.
Liz Sawyer from the Star Tribune. Ms. Clarke, you said that the DOJ acted swiftly in this case, but there was about a year in between the findings report coming out and the city saying that formal talks began when a draft consent decree was offered to them, and then formal negotiations started. Is that typical, and why was there such a year-long break in between?
You know, our work to ensure constitutional policing has been and remains one of our highest priorities, achieved not just through our pattern and practice investigations, but our prosecutions of officers who violate the law, our use of other vehicles such as Title VII and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and so much more. it was important that we get it right. We owe that to people here in Minneapolis. This was not a race to the finish line. We put forth a consent decree once we got the job done. Once we, in partnership with the city, felt that we had mapped out a remedial roadmap designed to address the violations that we identified here.
I waited.
Anything else that you'd add?